Corrupt, lying king. That's how millions now describe Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States, a man accused of twisting power for his own survival. Over 72% of Americans believe corruption is destroying their country, and more than 40 million voices have cried out against injustice that never seems to end. And yet, inside this explosive hearing, one woman refuses to bow. Her name is Jasmine Crockett, the warrior of justice, unafraid to stare straight into the eyes of the man who calls himself untouchable. When a corrupt king faces a fearless fighter, the question is no longer who shouts louder. It's who dares to uncover the truth the world has been waiting to hear. The hearing chamber was heavy with silence, a silence so sharp it seemed to cut through the air. Every seat was filled, every eye locked on the two figures who were about to collide. Reporters gripped their pens tighter, cameras hummed, waiting for the first spark. And then it came. Donald Trump leaned forward, lips curling into a smirk that had broken countless rivals before. His voice sliced through the stillness. Pathetic, small, unworthy to sit at this table. The words dripped with disdain, aimed directly at Jasmine Crockett. Gasps rolled across the room, followed by uneasy laughter from his loyal supporters. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she rose from her seat with a sudden, fiery energy, her chair scraping back with a screech that echoed off the chamber walls. Her eyes locked onto Trump's, burning with a fury that refused to be contained. And then she fired back. "You are the disgrace of this nation." Her words cracked like thunder. The chamber erupted. Reporters nearly dropped their pens. The public gallery exploded into whispers, shouts, and gasps. The presiding chair banged the gavel furiously. "Order! Order in this chamber!" But the pounding of wood against steel could not silence the storm that had just begun. Trump's smirk faltered for the briefest second, just long enough for the cameras to catch the twitch in his jaw. But he recovered quickly, leaning back as if he were still in control, as if the room did not feel the tremor of Jasmine's defiance. Jasmine didn't let up. Her voice cut through the chaos, rising above the gavel and the murmurs. "You've spent years poisoning this country with lies, wrapping yourself in the flag while shredding everything it stands for. But today, right here, right now, you will not walk away unchallenged." Every word she spoke seemed to shake the air itself. The crowd leaned forward. Some eyes glistened with hope, others with rage, but all were locked onto the two combatants who now stood like warriors on a battlefield. Trump shot back, his tone dripping with mockery. "Look at you, screaming like a child who doesn't understand how the world works. Justice is a toy in your hands, and you'll break it just like you've broken everything else." Jasmine tilted her head, almost smiling. Not the smile of defeat, but the smile of someone who had already seen the ending of this story and knew exactly how much it would terrify her opponent. "Justice doesn't break, Mr. President," she said, her voice calm, yet razor-sharp. "Justice bends only when men like you twist it for your greed. But when truth finally rises, it crushes everything in its path. Even kings." The chamber exploded again, louder this time. Every camera zoomed in, every reporter scribbled furiously, trying to capture every syllable before it vanished into the charged air. The presiding chair shouted for silence once more, but the gavel had become background noise, drowned out by the electricity surging between Crockett and Trump. It wasn't a debate anymore. It was combat. Every word was a blade, every silence, a duel of stares that threatened to ignite the very walls around them. Trump leaned forward, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the desk. His face turned crimson, and the smirk had long since vanished. "You think you scare me? You're nothing, a rookie playing with fire." Jasmine leaned closer, her eyes unblinking. "No, Mr. Trump, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to expose you." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, the room truly understood. This was not politics. This was a reckoning. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum. Every second felt like an eternity balanced on the edge of a blade. The presiding chair finally slammed the gavel one last time. "Proceed with order, or this chamber will clear." But no one moved. No one blinked. Every pair of eyes was locked onto the two figures who had already made the chamber their battlefield. By the time the echoes of the gavel faded, the crowd knew. This was not a hearing. This was war. And as the dust of those opening words settled, the thought lingered in every mind. Who would fall first? The corrupt lying king, or the fearless fighter who had just dared to call him what he truly was? And if you crave stories where power collides with truth, where the fight for justice burns brighter than the lies that seek to bury it, then join us here at Harrison Stories. Subscribe now and never miss the battles that define our time. The echo of Jasmine's defiance still lingered in the chamber when she leaned forward, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. There was no hesitation, no polite preamble, just the piercing thrust of truth. "Mr. President," she thundered, her tone laced with fire, "how much have you hidden? How many lies have you stacked on the backs of ordinary Americans while you crowned yourself untouchable?" The words ricocheted off the marble walls, shaking the hall like a sudden crack of thunder. Every eye snapped back to Trump. His jaw tightened. The mask of smug confidence cracked for a moment, then his voice erupted like a cannon. "You dare lecture me," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You're nothing but a notorious liar, a fraud draped in false virtue. You talk of justice, but you thrive on deception." Gasps surged through the chamber. The insult wasn't just aimed at Jasmine. It was aimed at the millions who saw themselves in her. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her chest rose as she steadied her breath, and with each heartbeat, her anger crystallized into steel. She shot back each syllable like the crack of a whip. "Liar, you've perfected the art. You've lied to the people, lied to the courts, lied even to yourself. The only thing bigger than your ego is the trail of damage you've left behind." The audience roared, half in support, half in outrage. The sound became a storm, applause colliding with boos, shouts clashing with gasps. The judge's gavel hammered like a war drum, but the chaos only thickened. Trump leaned forward across the table, his face flushed crimson. "Don't you dare stand there pretending to be the voice of America," he sneered, his teeth gritted. "You're a disgrace. You're nothing." Jasmine's eyes flared, catching the fluorescent light above, like sparks of molten glass. She stepped closer, no longer addressing just Trump, but the entire hall. "I am the voice you fear most," she declared, her voice reverberating with conviction. "The voice that cannot be bought, cannot be silenced, and will never stop until corruption falls." It wasn't just rhetoric. It was a battle cry, and it landed like a hammer against Trump's fragile composure. The cameras zoomed in. Viewers across the nation watched as two forces collided, not with fists, but with words honed sharp enough to wound. Trump tried to strike back, his voice rising to a shout that bordered on a scream. "You thrive on chaos. You think shouting makes you right? You think these theatrics fool anyone?" Jasmine didn't back down. She advanced again, her finger stabbing the air like a sword pointed at a corrupt monarch. "This isn't theater," she hissed, every syllable dripping with controlled fury. "This is accountability. This is justice finally staring you in the eye, and you hate it because you can't control it." For the briefest second, Trump faltered. He smirked, but the smirk was hollow. He chuckled, but it came out jagged, as if forced through clenched teeth. The crowd saw it. The cameras caught it. His hands, those hands that once gestured with sweeping arrogance, now gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles blanched. It was the smallest tell, but it betrayed the truth. The so-called king was rattled. Jasmine, sensing the tremor in his armor, pressed harder. "You laugh because you're afraid. You mock because you're cornered. And you hide behind insults because you've got nothing else left." Trump barked back, his voice cracking like glass under pressure. "You're delusional. You'll regret this when the people see through your lies." But the audience no longer leaned toward him. They leaned toward her. The rhythm of the chamber had shifted. The momentum was no longer his to command. Every exchange was a blow. Every rebuttal, a counterstrike. It wasn't debate, it was war, each sentence fired like bullets in a battle for moral ground. By the end of the exchange, the hall was vibrating with energy, a cauldron of fury and awe. Trump's laughter echoed once more, but it rang hollow. An empty performance meant to mask the storm brewing beneath his skin. And as the cameras lingered on his face, the truth revealed itself not in his words but in his body. The clenched fists, the stiff shoulders, the strained jawline. Donald Trump, the man who branded himself unshakable, was cracking. And Jasmine Crockett, the warrior of justice, had just delivered her first crushing blow. The hearing was no longer about questions and answers. It was about survival. It was about who could outlast the firestorm without breaking. The audience knew. This was only the beginning. The king was bleeding, and the fighter had just tasted her first victory. Jasmine didn't hesitate. Her hand darted to the thick folder resting at her side, fingers curling around it like a warrior gripping her sword. With a swift motion, she slammed it onto the table. The sound cracked through the chamber. A sharp, resonant thunderclap. The folder burst open, spilling a cascade of papers across the polished wood. Each sheet fluttered like a strike of lightning, smacking the surface with defiance. "This," Jasmine roared, her voice slicing through the uproar, "is your legacy, Mr. Trump. Not words, not bluster, but hard evidence. Page after page of broken promises, hidden dealings, and names you swore would never see the light of day." The crowd surged forward in their seats, hungry to glimpse what secrets lay on those pages. The air grew hotter, charged like a summer storm moments before it breaks. Trump's face twisted, fury bursting through his facade. He lurched forward, stabbing a finger at the scattered papers. "Rubbish!" he screamed. "Garbage! Every last word of it is a fabrication, a smear campaign, nothing but lies written by liars." But his voice cracked, desperation bleeding through the rage. The words rang hollow, even as they thundered from his throat. Jasmine didn't let him recover. She seized a sheet, held it aloft like a banner in battle, her voice vibrating with righteous fury. "This signature is yours. This deal is yours. This betrayal, all yours. Tell these people, tell this country that you didn't sign it. Look them in the eye and deny it." The audience gasped. The papers weren't abstract claims. They were receipts. Names, dates, signatures etched in ink that could not be erased. Trump's fist pounded the table. "You think the people are stupid? You think they'll believe the circus you're putting on?" he bellowed. "This is theater, nothing more. Fake, fake, fake." But the louder he shouted, the more the chamber tilted against him. Jasmine hurled document after document onto the desk, each slap a drumbeat of condemnation. The pile grew higher, the sound harsher, until the table itself seemed to groan under the weight of truth. The debate spiraled into something raw and primal. It was no longer a hearing. It was a shouting match, a duel of thunderous voices colliding in midair. "Admit it!" Jasmine's words were fire, burning hotter with every breath. "You sold out the people who trusted you." "Lies!" Trump spat back, his face red as embers, veins straining at his temples. "You're nothing but a fraud playing judge and jury." Their voices collided, one layered atop the other, until the chamber became a maelstrom of sound. The walls trembled with their fury. The microphones distorted, screeching under the weight of their battle. The audience became part of the storm. Cheers erupted from one side, jeers from the other. Every insult fueled the crowd. Every rebuttal fed their hunger. "Shame!" one voice bellowed. "Justice!" another screamed. It was no longer orderly, it was war. Trump, sensing the walls closing in, threw his head back and laughed. A cold, jagged laugh that echoed without warmth. But even that laughter betrayed him. His knuckles still whitened against the armrest, his body trembling under the strain. Jasmine pressed forward, voice unwavering, relentless as a hurricane. "You can tear up the pages. You can scream until the walls crack, but you cannot silence the truth. Not tonight. Not ever." The crowd roared. It wasn't applause. It was a battle cry, a swelling wave that crashed against the chamber walls. The presiding judge pounded his gavel again and again, the sharp cracks swallowed by the chaos. His face sagged with exasperation, his shoulders slumped. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, hands falling still. He let it happen. The storm could not be stopped. And as the people rose to their feet, voices uniting into a single chant, the chamber transformed into something unrecognizable. Continue, continue, continue. The word thundered like drums of war, shaking the foundation of the hall. The judge closed his eyes, resigned. The battle would rage on, and in that moment, America wasn't watching a hearing. They were witnessing history, a corrupt king clawing to hold his throne, and a fearless fighter, armed with truth, breaking through his defenses page by page. The storm had begun, and there was no turning back. Trump's eyes narrowed, a glint of cruelty sparking in their depths. If the documents couldn't be swatted away, he would go for something darker. Not her arguments, not her evidence. Her. With a twisted grin, he leaned back, savoring the silence that stretched for a heartbeat too long. Then he lunged. "Tell me, Congresswoman Crockett," he sneered, his voice dripping venom, "how does it feel to stand here pretending to be a saint when your own past is littered with scandal? Or do you think we've all forgotten those rumors?" The words slithered through the chamber like poison. Trump leaned harder, his voice growing louder, uglier. "They say you bent rules to climb where you are. They say you've got skeletons buried so deep even your closest allies wouldn't want to dig them up. Is that your kind of justice? Lies hidden beneath a smile?" The audience gasped, a ripple of shock breaking across the room. Half the chamber jeered, voices hurling venom of their own. The other half erupted with outrage, shouting him down, fists pounding the air. Jasmine froze for the briefest second, her face flushing scarlet. The sting of the smear burned her skin like acid, and for a heartbeat, the chamber seemed to tilt against her. But then she straightened, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and she snapped her gaze up, fire blazing in her eyes. "Rumors," she spat, her voice rising above the cacophony. "You mean the fiction you and your cronies pump into the veins of America because you cannot face the truth staring you in the eye?" The crowd roared, voices colliding into chaos. Some cheered, some booed. All were locked on her. "You attack my life," Jasmine continued, her voice gaining strength, "because my questions shake the foundations of yours. You invent stories because the real story terrifies you. You cling to lies because the truth makes you tremble." Her words sliced like steel. Trump jolted in his chair, his jaw twitching, his laugh forced and brittle. "Strong words for someone standing on shaky ground," he shot back, voice straining to sound confident. "You shout because you've got nothing else." Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned forward, slamming her palm against the table, her voice a lightning strike. "No, Mr. President, I shout because this room, this nation, needs to hear the truth louder than the lies you spew." The chamber detonated with noise. A wall of cheers clashed against a wave of boos. The air rattled with stamping feet, fists pounding against wooden benches, voices torn between rage and reverence. The judge tried again to pound his gavel, his forehead damp with sweat. But order had slipped through his fingers. This was no longer his courtroom. It was an arena. Trump grinned, mistaking the chaos as a proof of his dominance. He raised his hands as though conducting the uproar, his voice booming above it. "See? They don't believe you. They see through your performance. You're nothing but smoke and mirrors, Crockett. A fraud dressed in righteous robes." Jasmine's lips curled into a thin smile, but her eyes never softened. She rose to her full height, shoulders squared, gaze locked on him with unshakable fury. The chamber hushed, drawn in by the sudden quiet, by the sense that something bigger was about to erupt. She raised her arm and pointed, her finger aimed like a blade straight at Donald Trump. Her voice thundered through the hall, steady and certain, sealing the moment in history. "You can mock, you can smear, you can throw mud until your hands are black with filth, but you will not escape what's coming. Not from me, not from the people. You will not escape." The words rang like a bell, every syllable hammered into the chamber's foundation, echoing through the stunned silence that followed. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the crowd erupted once more, louder than before, their voices colliding into a wave that shook the rafters. Some screamed her name, others spat curses. But no one, not a single soul, looked away. The venom had been unleashed, but Jasmine had turned it into fuel. The battle was far from over. The fight was only sharpening, and in that boiling arena, one truth became undeniable. The corrupt king had met his fiercest challenger. If you believe in truth cutting through lies and stories that refuse to bow to corruption, make sure you subscribe to Harrison's Stories, where every battle for justice finds its voice. The echoes of Jasmine's defiance had barely faded when the next wave struck. Trump shifted in his seat, and suddenly, as if on cue, voices rose from his flank. His allies. One after another, they leapt into the fray. "This is a witch hunt," one barked, his fist pounding the desk. "She's nothing but a loudmouth looking for headline," another sneered. A third leaned forward, his voice oily, mocking. "Does she even know what she's talking about? Or is she just here to play hero in front of the cameras?" The words flew like daggers, sharp and unrelenting. The chamber turned into a circle of jeers, Jasmine standing at its blazing center. Every insult piled higher, every slander meant to drown her voice, to choke her under their coordinated fury. But Jasmine did not flinch. Her eyes swept across the men circling her like wolves. Her chest rose as she inhaled the chaos, and when she spoke, her voice cut through like a blade of lightning. "You think your noise will bury me?" she roared, her words bouncing off marble and steel. "You think your power will protect him? A gang of cowards shielding a corrupt king because you fear standing alone." Her voice grew sharper, louder, unyielding. The allies shouted back, but their voices tangled, collapsing beneath the clarity of hers. "You can scream all you want," Jasmine declared, stepping forward so that every word was lit by the glaring lights of the chamber. "But remember this, one voice, if it carries truth, outweighs 1,000 lies." The audience stirred, a shiver running through the hall. For a moment the allies faltered, their rhythm broken, their jeers swallowed by the force of her conviction. Trump, watching, smirked, though his eyes betrayed the tension coiled in his chest. He gestured, urging his circle forward. Again they lunged. "She's unfit! She's a disgrace! She should be thrown out!" The air pulsed with venom, every insult layered upon the last. But Jasmine stood her ground, the storm battering against her resolve, without moving her an inch. Then, with deliberate calm, she lifted her chin and spoke, her voice steady, her words resonant. "Do you hear yourselves?" she asked, scanning their faces one by one. "A chorus of puppets, desperate to please the hand that feeds. But know this, I don't need an army, I don't need a shield. One voice is enough, one truth is enough, one fighter is enough." The chamber vibrated with tension. Even her enemies paused, their attacks momentarily silenced. And then she delivered the blow, her voice rising, clear as a bell. "Because one fighter, standing on justice, can expose not only a king, but his entire band of accomplices." The crowd erupted. Some screamed in outrage, others in awe. The noise was deafening, a battlefield of clashing voices that made the rafters tremble. Trump slammed his hand against the desk, his grin gone, his fury naked. "Lies, every word, you're pathetic," he shouted. But Jasmine did not look at him. She stood in the center of the storm, shoulders squared, her voice carrying above all others. "One against many, and still I do not bow." The words echoed. They lingered in the chamber, refusing to fade, until even the loudest shouts seemed to stumble beneath them. And then, as the roar of the room pulsed like a living beast, something subtle shifted. Across the benches, a figure stirred. A senator, one who had remained silent through the fury, who had watched carefully as the storm raged, leaned ever so slightly forward. His eyes met Jasmine's, and he gave the smallest nod. It was not loud, it was not public, but it was enough. In that flicker of acknowledgement, Jasmine knew she was no longer standing alone. The cracks in Trump's wall were beginning to show. The corrupt king still roared, his circle still circled, but the tide had begun to turn. Trump straightened in his chair, forcing his breath into something slower, steadier. His rage dimmed, masked now by a cruel smirk curling across his lips. He leaned back, as if he were suddenly in control again, as if the chaos had been nothing more than theater stage for his amusement. His voice dropped low, oily, sliding across the chamber. "You're trembling, Jasmine. I can see it, he said, dragging out her name like a taunt. His chuckle followed, hollow and cold. You talk tough, but the closer we get, the more your mask slips. Admit it. You're scared. The words slithered into the air, designed to wound deeper than any shouted insult. A hush fell, the crowd leaning forward, waiting for her to break. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She unfolded her arms slowly, deliberately, before folding them back across her chest in one sharp motion. Her chin lifted, her eyes locked on his with unflinching contempt. Scared? She said, her voice calm but lined with fire. No, Mr. Trump. It's you who's shaking. Her glare bore into him, every syllable a strike, deliberate and merciless. You laugh to cover the cracks. You smirk to mask the panic. But I see it, and so does everyone else in this chamber. Gasps rippled across the hall. Trump's smirk faltered for the briefest instant. He forced it back, but the flicker of vulnerability had already been caught. The tension in the room thickened, pressing down like a storm cloud ready to burst. Two figures locked in a stare, words sharpened into blades. Neither moved. Neither blinked. It was as though the next syllable could trigger something primal, something that would spill beyond words. Trump leaned forward now, abandoning the pretense of calm. You think you can stand against me? You're nothing. You're a rookie standing in a ring you don't belong in. His grin twisted into a snarl. One swing from me and you'll crumble. The crowd erupted. Cheers, boos, the sound of a nation tearing itself in two inside four marble walls. The gavel struck again, its echo buried beneath the roar. Jasmine stepped forward, closing the space between them until her voice landed like a blow to his chest. One swing from you? She hissed. Try it, because the truth is a weight you cannot carry, and the moment you lift your hand, it will crash down and bury you. The chamber shook with the collision of their words. For a heartbeat, it felt like fists might follow, that the verbal war would tip into something brutal, physical. The air trembled with that possibility, a suffocating silence gripping the room between eruptions of noise. Trump's eyes burned, veins standing out at his temples. He opened his mouth to retort, his tongue tripping over words sharpened by rage. And then it happened. A slip. Don't act like you know everything, he barked. You weren't in that meeting when the... He froze. Too late. The words had already escaped, hanging heavy in the chamber like smoke that could not be pulled back. The crowd erupted into gasps, voices clashing in disbelief. What meeting? Someone shouted. Did he just admit? Another cried. Jasmine's eyes flared, her lips parting in a predator's smile. She pounced, her voice ringing with triumph. That meeting, Mr. President? The one you swore never happened? The one you've denied under oath? The hall exploded, the sound no longer noise but thunder, deafening in its force. Some screamed in outrage. Others roared in vindication. All were electrified, their eyes darting between the man on the throne of arrogance and the woman who had just cornered him. Trump tried to recover, his hands waving, his voice scrambling. I misspoke. I didn't mean, you twisted my words. But it was too late. The damage was done. The mask had slipped. The crack had widened. And Jasmine Crockett, arms still crossed, eyes blazing, stood tall in the storm she had forced him to create. For the first time, the corrupt king looked cornered. For the first time, the fighter had seized not just the crowd, but his very breath. The battle of minds had tilted, and the chamber knew it. Jasmine Crockett didn't let the moment breathe. She lunged forward, not with fists, but with facts sharp as blades. Her voice cut through the roar of the chamber like iron striking stone. You just admitted it, Mr. Trump, she declared, her hand slamming against the stack of files. Let's open this box you've tried so hard to bury. She yanked out a sheet, numbers, timelines, signatures. Her finger stabbed the page, then she threw it onto the desk with a thud. This isn't my word against yours. This is recorded. This is evidence. The crowd gasped, the weight of her words echoing against the marble walls. Some clapped, others booed, but all leaned in closer, hungry for the next blow. Trump tried to rise above it, tried to summon the booming authority that once carried him through storms. He pounded the table with his palm. Fake, all of it, fake. Lies cooked up by enemies who hate your president. But his voice was fraying, strained, breaking at the edges. Each shout sounded less like power, more like desperation. Jasmine wasn't finished, not even close. She pulled another document, held it high. This, Mr. Trump, is from your own staff. Dates, places, transactions. Signed off by people sitting in your circle. She slapped it down. Do you want me to read the names? Trump's face flushed, his mouth opened, but no words came fast enough. He tried to laugh, tried to wave it off, but the laughter cracked halfway, thin and hollow. The chamber smelled blood. Here's a witness statement, Jasmine continued, her voice rising with each word, riding the wave of the crowd's energy. Not mine, not rumors, a sworn statement under oath. She read the first line, her voice booming. He was there. He saw you, and he's not the only one. The noise in the hall reached fever pitch. People stood, shouting, clapping, shaking their fists in fury or triumph. The temperature felt as though it had risen 10 degrees, the air charged with fire. Trump threw his arms wide, his face red, veins bulging. This is an ambush, a witch hunt, he barked. His words stumbled, tripping over one another, his throat raw from the strain. I'm still the most powerful man here, and don't you forget it. But the chamber wasn't buying the show anymore. Every powerful syllable cracked like thin ice under heavy boots. His voice, once booming, rasped and faltered. Jasmine pressed harder, stepping into the sound of his unraveling. You call it a witch hunt because the truth burns you, she shot back. You scream louder because you know your lies are collapsing. She lifted yet another sheet, shaking it so the paper rattled like a war drum. Numbers don't lie. Witnesses don't vanish. You can roar, but you cannot erase what's on this page. Her words landed like hammers, one after another, merciless, pounding the cracks wider. The crowd was no longer divided into silence and noise. It was a storm, deafening, chaotic, alive. Trump's voice broke entirely now, hoarse and strained. You'll regret this, he shouted, every muscle in his neck taut, his face a mask of fury stretched thin over fear. You'll all regret this. But the chamber had heard what it needed to. The threat, meant to cow them, only rang with the hollow clang of weakness. And worst of all, his voice trembled, the final syllables betraying the very fear he had tried to project onto her. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply stood tall, eyes locked on him, unflinching. Her silence said what no words could. She had broken him. The hall roared, a cacophony of cheers and boos, the sound of a nation divided but electrified. The corrupt king had shouted his last threat of the night, and in that quivering echo, his weakness screamed louder than his rage ever could. But Trump wasn't finished. Cornered animals never are. He slammed both palms on the desk, leaning forward with the kind of venom that dripped more from fear than fury. His voice cracked, but it carried, loud enough to slice through the storm of noise. She is a traitor, he spat, his finger jabbing toward Jasmine. A disgrace to this chamber, a woman who hates America, who would sell us out if it meant her name in the papers. The chamber gasped. The word hung in the air like a dagger. Traitor. Jasmine froze for half a second, not in fear, but in shock at the shamelessness of it. Her chair screeched back as she shot to her feet, her palms slamming against the oak table so hard the microphones rattled. You dare, she shouted, eyes blazing. You dare call me a traitor? Coming from the man who has dragged this country through the mud, who has turned his back on truth, on law, on the very oath he swore to keep. The crowd erupted. Half the chamber screamed at Trump, the other half at Jasmine, voices colliding into a wall of sound so loud the microphones squealed and died. The chairman's gavel pounded, wood on wood, but it was swallowed by the storm. Trump's mouth twisted into a grin. Ugly, smug. He thought the chaos was his ally. He leaned into it, waving his arms, stoking the fire. Look at her. Look how she screams, how she snaps. That's not justice. That's hate. That's treason in its purest form. Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned across the table, her face inches from the man who had painted her with poison. Her voice didn't waver. It roared. The only stain on this nation's flag is you, she shot back, each syllable cracking like a whip. You dare to call me un-American? You who peddled lies, who used power not to serve but to shield yourself. You are the disgrace. You are the betrayal. And history will carve your name as its deepest scar. The word struck harder than any fist. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, like the oxygen had been sucked out. Trump staggered in his chair, his grin twitching into a snarl. He tried to speak, but the chorus of voices drowned him out. Shame! Some screamed. Liar! Others cried. The sound was primal, raw, a nation tearing itself open inside these four walls. Trump pounded the desk with a fist, but the wood absorbed his fury. His eyes darted, wild, searching for an anchor, for some handhold to claw back the narrative. But Jasmine was already moving. Her hand reached into the stack of documents she had guarded like sacred fire. She pulled a folder marked not with ink, but with inevitability. She held it high, her fingers trembling, not with fear, but with righteous rage. You want to talk about betrayal? She shouted, her voice cutting through the storm. You want to brand me with treason? Then let's show the people here. Let's show the people watching what real betrayal looks like. The chamber fell into a strange hush, the kind that comes only when something too heavy to ignore is about to fall. Even Trump, sweat beating at his temple, froze for the briefest second. Jasmine opened the folder. The sound of the paper sliding free echoed like steel unsheathing. She slapped the first page down on the desk. This, she said, her finger driving into the words, is proof, not whispers, not rumors, signed, sealed, witnessed. Trump's face drained of color. The flush of anger gave way to something worse, the pallor of recognition. He knew what she held. He knew the blade had finally found its mark. The crowd erupted again, half in disbelief, half in hungry approval. Phones shot into the air, cameras zoomed, history crystallizing in the grain of paper, and the tremor of a voice too fierce to be silenced. Trump leaned back, his lips parting as if to roar again. But no roar came, only silence and the faint tremor of his jaw. Jasmine stood tall, the evidence before her, her eyes locked not just on Trump, but on every man and woman in the room. Her voice lowered, but it carried farther than any scream. This country deserves truth, she said, and tonight, truth is no longer yours to bury. The chamber was on fire, and in that blaze, the corrupt king turned pale. But then, he moved. Trump straightened in his chair, shoulders stiff, lips curling into something that tried to mimic confidence. He reached beneath the desk, pulled out a thick envelope stamped with red letters. Confidential. Classified. Eyes only. Gas rippled across the chamber. He slapped it down with theatrical force, the pages inside spilling across the table like cards from a rigged deck. You think you cornered me, Jasmine? He barked, his voice regaining a shred of its old thunder. Well, two can play at that game. Here's the real story, the one they never wanted the people to see. His allies roared, fists pounded desks, cheers rattled the rafters. The chamber tilted toward him, drawn by the spectacle of hidden truth pulled into the light. Trump's grin widened. He held up a page, waving it like a flag. Proof, he thundered. Proof that she, the so-called fighter for justice, has ties, has secrets, has sold pieces of this country to foreign hands. The word foreign cracked like a whip, feeding the crowd's primal hunger. His faction rose to their feet, chanting his name, drowning out the sound of dissent. For a heartbeat, it seemed Jasmine had been ambushed. The room tilted against her, the weight of a nation's eyes pressing down, waiting for her to break. But Jasmine Crockett did not break. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and let the storm whip itself into frenzy. Her lips curved into something colder than a smile. When the roar finally gave her space to speak, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm sliced deeper than any scream. Is that your masterstroke, Mr. Trump? She asked almost softly. Your classified revelation? Trump slammed the page again, desperate to keep momentum. It's all here, dates, names, signatures, everything you've tried to hide. Jasmine rose slowly, deliberately. Her heels clicked against the marble, each step an iron nail driven into his performance. She reached for the page in his hand. He tried to pull it back, but she yanked it free with a single sharp motion. She studied it for one long, deliberate moment. Then she held it up, turning it so every camera, every eye could see. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her tone shifting into ice-cold steel, "what the president has just presented is not truth. It's forgery." The chamber stilled, as if every lung had stopped drawing air. "Forgery?" Trump spat. "Lies, you're cornered and you know it." But Jasmine wasn't finished. She held the page higher, tilting it toward the lights. "Do you see this signature? Wrong date format. Do you see the seal? Outdated by 3 administrations. And here," she tapped a line with her finger, "a location that didn't even exist at the time this was supposedly written." Murmurs erupted. Confusion, doubt, sparks of betrayal ignited in the very ranks that had cheered him seconds earlier. Jasmine didn't stop. She grabbed another sheet from the pile he had spilled. Identical font, identical spacing, copy-paste forgery, the kind of thing a high schooler could cobble together in a dark basement. The room trembled, half in fury, half in dawning realization. Phones buzzed, journalists whispered, allies shifted uneasily in their seats. Trump tried to laugh, but it cracked. His eyes darted, his lips trembled with the effort of holding the performance together. "She's lying," he bellowed. "Don't listen to her. She's the fraud, not me." But his own allies weren't all shouting now. Some exchanged glances, whispers moving like cracks through glass. A senator leaned back, arms crossed, doubt carved across his face. Another lowered his gaze, refusing to join the chant. The rift had opened. The performance that was meant to save him had begun to unravel in his hands. Jasmine dropped the forged document back onto the desk with contempt. "Is this what you have left, Mr. Trump? Fake pages, staged drama, cheap theater?" Her eyes swept the chamber. "This is not a king defending his throne. This is a desperate man throwing smoke to cover the fire that's already burning him alive." The silence that followed was more dangerous than any roar. It was the silence of shifting tides, of loyalties cracking, of power leaking away grain by grain. And for the first time that night, Donald Trump's circle looked less like an army and more like a crumbling wall. Jasmine Crockett saw the crack, and she widened it. She gathered the files spread across the desk, her hands quick, precise, relentless. Page after page, document after document. Each one a shard of glass, sharp and undeniable. She laid them out not as fragments, but as a mosaic. Piece by piece, she built the story. A story of corruption, of lies, of betrayal dressed in red, white, and blue. "This," she said, her finger tracing one line, "connects to this." She slapped down another. "And this testimony corroborates both. The dates align. The money trails match. The signatures are identical." The chamber leaned in, pulled by the gravity of her rhythm. It was no longer scattered points of attack. It was a picture, a portrait painted in ink and shame. Trump's breathing grew loud, audible even without a microphone. He shook his head violently, his jowls trembling, his tie askew. "Lies, all lies," he barked, the sound breaking. "This is a setup. You don't see it. It's all rigged." But his voice betrayed him. Every syllable wavered, jagged, weak. His face glistened under the harsh lights, sweat running down his temple in the thick, shining streams. Jasmine did not look at him. She didn't need to. Her eyes were fixed on the people, on the witnesses, on the millions who would hear this echo across the nation. She lifted a final folder, heavier than the rest. "This," she said, holding it aloft, "is the piece that ties it all together." She opened it slowly, deliberately, letting the suspense coil tighter around the room. Inside were photographs, letters, signatures, testimonies stacked like bricks in a wall no lie could climb. Jasmine spread them across the table, her hands sweeping over them like a general over a battlefield map. "All roads lead here. All the fragments converge, and the conclusion is not mine. It is the evidence's. It speaks for itself." She straightened, her voice deepening, resonant, undeniable. Donald Trump betrayed his oath, betrayed his people, betrayed the nation he swore to protect. The silence that followed was suffocating. The chamber, once a storm of sound, now held its breath. Even the cameras seemed to freeze, waiting for what would happen next. Trump's face contorted, his lips trembling. You, you can't prove it, he stammered. You can't. This is theater, fake news, witch hunt, all of it. His voice cracked like glass under pressure. He pounded the desk again and again, but each strike was weaker, less commanding. The sweat now soaked through his collar, dripping down his neck, darkening the fabric. Still no sound from the chamber, just silence. Deadly, suffocating silence. And then, the first shout. Shame! It came from the gallery, harsh and raw. Then another. Liar! And another. Fraud! The words multiplied, voices rising in a tidal wave of fury. The silence shattered, replaced by a deafening chorus aimed not at Jasmine, but at him. Trump staggered in his seat, blinking against the roar. His hands clutched the arms of his chair as if to anchor himself against the tide of voices crashing down on him. The chairman's gavel banged, but it was drowned by the outrage. The chamber had turned. The people had turned. Jasmine did not raise her arms in victory. She did not need to. Her silence, her stillness, was more powerful than any celebration. She stood, the architect of truth, while the man who had called her traitor drowned in the sound of his own undoing. Trump tried to rise, tried to summon defiance, but his knees wobbled. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, darted from face to face, searching desperately for loyalty. But loyalty had cracked. He collapsed back into his chair, chest heaving, lips trembling. No more laughter, no more smirks. His grin was gone. His face was flushed and broken, his eyes red with rage or fear or both. The truth had not just been spoken, it had exploded, and its fire left the corrupt king scorched and silent. Jasmine Crockett did not move for a moment. She let the silence hang like a blade suspended in air, gleaming, inevitable. Then she stepped forward. Each stride echoed like a drumbeat, steady, commanding, unstoppable. She stopped just a few feet from him. Her eyes locked onto his, and when she spoke, her voice was no longer just a voice. It was thunder rolling through the chamber. Mr. Trump, she said, every syllable sharp as steel, you cannot run from the truth. The words ricocheted off the walls, reverberating in the bones of every person present. They weren't a statement. They were a sentence. Trump's mouth opened, but no sound came. He reached for papers scattered before him, flipping them with shaking hands, as if somewhere between the lines he could conjure salvation. But the council was not merciful. A senior member leaned forward, spectacles low on his nose, voice cutting the silence. Mr. Trump, he asked, do you deny that your signature appears on these documents? That your instructions led to the very betrayals outlined tonight? Trump froze. The question was simple, but simplicity was its cruelty. A cornered man cannot answer without bleeding. His lips parted. A sound escaped. Half cough, half stutter. I don't recall. This is. He broke off, eyes darting wildly. The chamber held its breath, the tension a noose tightening with every second. Jasmine stepped closer. No deflection, no distractions, no walls to hide behind. Her tone rose, not in volume, but in force, the way an avalanche grows not by speed, but by weight. Answer the question. Trump's chest heaved. His hands clutched the table, knuckles white, sweat dripping onto the polished wood below. He looked like a man drowning on dry land. The chairman leaned forward. This council demands an answer. Trump's jaw worked furiously, grinding teeth against panic. I never. It's rigged, all of it, he finally gasped. His voice cracked, thin and desperate. Everyone's against me. She's twisting everything. You don't see it. The chamber did not roar in his defense. It sat in icy silence, like a jury already settled. Outside, the streets were alive. The sounds seeped into the building, faint at first, then swelling. Voices, thousands strong, rolling like waves. Jasmine! 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 The chant hit the chamber walls, vibrating through the marble, impossible to ignore. Even Trump flinched at the sound, his eyes flickering toward the closed doors, as if afraid the crowd itself would come storming in. Jasmine let the chant carry her. It wasn't vanity, it was momentum, the force of a people who had seen enough. She raised her hand, silencing the chamber with a single gesture. Then she leaned in, her face inches from his, her voice low, deliberate, merciless. You built your empire on lies. You mocked the law, spat on truth, and thought power would protect you. She paused, letting each word sink like a nail into wood. But tonight, you stand naked before the evidence, and there is no escape. Trump's eyes darted downward. His shoulders sagged, chest still heaving. For a moment, just a moment, he looked less like a conqueror and more like a man stripped of armor, trembling before the blade. The chairman's gavel struck. This council has heard enough. The chamber broke into murmurs, some hushed, others rising with intensity. The evidence was airtight, the man before them undone. The atmosphere was no longer of debate, it was of aftermath. Trump's breathing slowed, then quickened again, uneven, jagged. He lowered his head, the weight of the moment forcing it down. The cameras captured it, the crowd outside felt it. Donald Trump bowing not by choice but by gravity of truth. But even as he bent, his jaw locked tight. And through clenched teeth, barely more than a hiss, he forced the words out. I haven't lost yet. The chamber froze. It wasn't strength in his voice, but venom. Not victory, but spite. Jasmine stood tall, unflinching. She didn't need to answer, because outside the people already had. Their voices crashed like thunder through the streets, drowning out his whisper. Jasmine! 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 The king had bowed, but even in defeat, he clung to denial like a drowning man to a stone. The world had seen enough, and the final blow had been struck. The chamber that had once pulsed with shouting now throbbed with silence. Only the distant roar of the crowd outside remained, a living heartbeat pounding through the marble walls. Inside, the corrupt king had retreated into himself. Donald Trump sat slumped in his chair, shoulders heavy, his face half buried in shadows. The bright lights of the chamber no longer reached him. For years he had commanded attention with a sneer, a gesture, a storm of words. Now he commanded nothing. The papers before him lay scattered like wreckage after a storm, irrelevant, powerless, exposed. His hand trembled on the armrest. He raised his head once, only for the cameras to catch the hollowness in his eyes. There was no roar left, no crown, no throne, only the image of a man unraveling before the world. And across from him stood Jasmine Crockett. She had not moved back. She remained in the center of the chamber, illuminated by the flood of lights that swung toward her, as if pulled by gravity. Her stance was unshaken, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. Where Trump looked like a shadow, Jasmine looked like the flame. Her eyes swept across the chamber, not in arrogance but in certainty. Every ally, every opponent, every spectator felt it, her presence filling the void his collapse had left behind. The chairman raised the gavel, but the crowd outside drowned even the strike of wood on stone. Jasmine! 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 The chant thundered louder, rattling windows, spilling into the chamber like a tide. It wasn't just noise, it was history taking its shape, the sound of a people declaring who they now believed in. Trump's fingers dug into the armrest. For a flicker of a moment, he opened his mouth, as if to spit one last insult, one last denial, but no words came. The fight had drained out of him, leaving only bitterness and silence. Jasmine turned toward him, her voice calm but heavy with finality. Justice can be delayed, she said, each word precise, deliberate, unshakable. But it will never be defeated. The words rolled through the chamber like a final verdict. They cut through the silence, through the shadows, through the fragile armor of the man who had once called himself untouchable. Trump looked away, his head bowed, not in humility, but in exhaustion. It was not the bow of surrender, but the slump of inevitability. The cameras captured it all. The world would remember not just his words, but his silence. Not just his threats, but his fall. Jasmine, meanwhile, stood framed by light. Every camera turned to her. Every microphone leaned in. Every eye, inside and outside the chamber, locked on her as the symbol of a battle fought and won. She did not raise her arms in victory. She did not shout. She let the people do it for her. The chant outside grew deafening. The streets had become rivers of sound, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, voices braided into one roar. Jasmine! 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 It was the sound of triumph. It was the sound of change. It was the sound of a corrupt empire cracking. But even as the cheers filled the night, Jasmine knew this was not the end. No tyrant ever yields completely. No battle for truth ends in a single chamber. She felt it in her bones. The war had only shifted. The battlefield might move, the weapons might change, but the struggle between truth and corruption would continue. She turned her head slightly, catching the faintest glimpse of Trump in the shadows. His lips moved almost imperceptibly. Her ears caught the hiss, low and venomous. This isn't over. Jasmine's expression did not change. She simply looked back at him, steady, unwavering, and replied, not with words but with silence strong enough to crush his whisper. She turned back toward the chamber, toward the light, toward the crowd outside that surged like an unstoppable tide. Her voice rose once more, this time for the people, this time for the future. The fight continues, but tonight belongs to justice. The chamber erupted, the crowd roared, and the night sky carried her words farther than any walls could contain. Trump remained seated in the darkness, swallowed by his own silence. Jasmine stood tall in the light, her figure carved against history itself. And as the curtain fell on this night of reckoning, one truth remained unshakable. The corrupt king had stumbled, and the people had chosen their champion. The battle was not over, but the victory was hers. In every clash between arrogance and truth, it is not the loudest voice that prevails, but the one anchored in courage and integrity. Jasmine's fight reminds us that corruption can roar, deceive, and strike with cruelty. But in the end, its foundation always cracks under the weight of truth. And so the lesson is clear. When faced with injustice, we must not bow, for every small act of courage adds to the chorus that one day topples even the mightiest of lies. If this clash shook you, don't look away. Hold it, share it, speak it aloud. Like, comment, and send it to someone who still believes justice must never bow to corruption. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where every voice for truth finds its echo. Hit the bell, because the next battle won't be safe. It will be louder, sharper, and it may forever change how you see power and resistance. This tale is a fictional dramatization, drawn from the shadows of real injustice and the light of real courage. Any resemblance is symbolic, crafted for reflection, for critique, for awakening. Thank you for watching. Corruption collapses only when we stand. This is Harrison Stories.